and also, but my favorite tuning system is just intonation, which is natural, system of the nature. And I recorded some piece. I recorded a piece by Alauddin Matthew, composer, and it was published in the U.S., which is called, which was published by Cold Mountain Music, and its title is Lattice. So you can check it out as well. Yeah, so I try to play in as much as possible with many EDOs, equal divisions of the octave, and many tuning systems.
Great, and
Thank you.
And actually, please meet Tyson. Tyson is up next, and he's doing a workshop on create your own personal music soundtrack. So again, kind of another nice segue into his group. So anyway, thank you so much. I will.
You're welcome.
I will unpin you and say goodbye. Thanks for joining us. Tyson, it's all yours.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sherry. Do you mind allowing me to record too?
Absolutely, I can do that. Cool. And do I go to more and I say, here you go.
Cool.
Did that work? You good?
Thank you. Yeah, I believe that it is working. That last workshop was amazing. Thank you so much for incorporating like microtonal tuning systems and just intonation. I'm a really big fan of all of that myself, as I imagine quite a few people here are within the Maker Music Festival. Yeah, what cool stuff. I want to say, first of all, thank you to the Maker Music Festival for inviting me to do this workshop. I want to say a huge thank you to Sherry and Joe for organizing all of this incredible event and all of these amazing makers together. Yeah, and just a huge thank you to the music maker community. It's really inspiring seeing what everybody else does. It's really amazing to be a part of it. It's really kind of phenomenal to see everybody pushing new boundaries and creating new ways of doing stuff. The workshop that I'm going to teach is called How to Create Your Own Personal Musical Soundtrack. And in it, I'm going to teach you or introduce this concept of fundamental frequency, which is we all speak with different inflections, and each person keeps coming back to the same note. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is, some of you would be able to figure that out anyways, but I'll also show you ways of figuring out what your own personal note is, or what your fundamental frequency is, and then kind of break down some of the aspects of the musical language of intervals and scales, and how to develop your own personal relationship with them so you can use them as tool sets for creating music. And I'm going to do it so it can apply to multiple instruments. I have diagrams that will show it on piano as well as guitar. But the way that I'm going to talk about it should apply to alternate tuning systems, different intonation systems, just intonation, found tuning systems where you might not know the precise notes, and kind of how to build up or find the language of an instrument that you've made, or one that you're playing of somebody else's that you might not know what tuning system it's in. To start with, I'll introduce myself a little bit. My name's Tyson Ayers. I'm probably most known as I do a lot of large-scale sound art installations. I did some pieces at Maker Faire, probably 2009, 2010. I show at a lot of music festivals, at Burning Man. A lot of my stuff goes under the Sound Cave project, which are these rooms built out of thousands of strings that surround you, creating sympathetic resonance, so you can go in and play with your own echoes. I use just intonation, mathematical tuning systems. I do large pentatonic systems tuned off of sound healing frequencies like the Schumann resonance, and set it up so anybody who's never played music can go in and just touch a string and touch another one, and they're all tuned to sound great together. And pretty soon they find themselves playing music, and they find themselves playing music with others, which I feel is just an amazing experience, especially for people that don't get to do that very much. My most recent piece before COVID hit was called The Shrine of Sympathetic Resonance. Is one of these sound caves, but 37 foot tall, 50 foot across, had over 10,000 strings in it. It's probably over 50,000 pounds. Yeah, and I've done musical bike paths that play melodic vibrations in your body. I've done orchestra of junk instruments and natural building materials like sea kelp trumpets. I love everybody creating new instruments, and I love different intonation systems. I'm also a performer, music composer, workshop presenter, and a bunch of other things. But I'll kind of jump into this material right now. And so, first off, it's what is your fundamental frequency? This is a concept that I learned from a woman who has a group called Harps of Lorient out of San Diego. She's teaching practitioners to use harps in hospice care and complementary medicine, teaching people how to find, I forget the term that she uses instead of fundamental frequency, but helps people find the tone that they're speaking at, and then teaches them how to use that to affect their bodies and affect their mind. To, if they're constipated, helping play scales that help downward motion, stuff like that. I went to one of her workshops at the World Sound Healing Conference, probably back in 2007. Amazing event, like living in a Tom Robbins novel. And first heard of the concept there, and then took it back and applied all of my music composition background and found my own key. So the first thing in finding your note is you may end up wanting to find a friend who's a good musician. You should be able to do it on your own too, but as I'm speaking, I keep coming back to this note, and occasionally I go up. There's different inflections, so whenever anybody's speaking, we often have different inflections in our voice, or our note's going up, it's going down, but we keep coming back to the same note. And so that particular note is what I'm calling the fundamental frequency. Sometimes the best ways to find this is asking somebody to speak their name or where they're from or anything that they really identify with. So if you're doing this for somebody else, any of those questions work. Or what did you have for breakfast that day, or just anything that they identify with. And then from there, you can actually, like listening to that note, you can then find it on a piano. You can end up trying to play it into a tuner. I have a couple links that I'll send out, but this is something that either you can do on an instrument, and if you don't have an instrument, you can use like a chromatic tuner and get help with that. So you find your note and then probably hum at that or sing at that. And I'm going to include some links right now for free online tuners that you can use. If you want to, go ahead and find your own note during this, or you can do it at another time. With that fundamental note, we basically use that as a root, or our starting note, or a fundamental, or our home note. And in this workshop, I'm going to be trying to explain things in a way that someone who has no music theory background, music composition background, or might not even play music can understand, as well as I'm going to try to explain things in a way that people doing just intonation and fitting their own instruments too can get some value out of it too. But that root note, that fundamental, is essentially like our home note. It's the note that releases tension. It's the note that feels complete when we come back to. On my, let's see here. Oh. So I'm going to be playing on a piano, and it seems like it's probably going to be better to pen one screen. I can share the screen and pin my piano screen. That might.
Yeah.
Uh,
See which one. See here 1 second. You think I would get better at this over time?
well, I can't make the piano screen big or the pen screen big, so I'm gonna
So
take
let
that.
let me remove this pin, and then let me find your piano screen. If you want to,
I have the sound turned off to not create
how's
an
that?
echo.
Does that work?
If you're seeing the piano screen, then that should work.
Yeah, we're not.
Okay, great.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to show this concept of a root note and a lot of these intervals and scales on a piano. I also have some diagrams that work on a guitar, but I'm also going to try to describe it in a way that it'd work on any other instrument. This root note right now, I'm doing it in C just because it makes all the white notes a major scale. That's sometimes easier for people to see, but any note that I start off with, it wouldn't have to be a C, it could be an F sharp, A, but whatever note is the first note that we hear, kind of becomes a reference point, essentially. It's kind of becomes the home, or the note that we're coming back to. Sometimes it's not actually the first note, but in particular, it's whatever note. There's notes that create this tension that really wants the next note, and when we land on that note that releases all that tension, brings us back home or the start of a next cycle, that's what we call the root note. And so if you find your own fundamental frequency using one of those tuners or on the piano, I would just adjust that root note to be that note. So you could be at an F sharp, you could be E flat, so on and so forth. But I want you to play it as a drone. And so I'm going to play a root, I'm going to play the octave, I might play the fifth in here. And more similar to a lot of classical Indian, classical Persian, and Arabic music, there's a root note or a drone that continues playing and playing and playing. And that way, the notes above it are heard in relationship to it. And Western music with chords will still have this relationship of these intervals, but if you play it with the drone, it just makes it way easier to hear and hear that relationship. So like right now, I'm gonna play a couple intervals, and what I want to do is invite you to kind of listen to them, try to figure out what movie scene it would be for you, what effect it has on your body or your mind, your emotions. And there might be some notes that are more dissonant, there might be some notes that are really peaceful sounding and really relaxed, there might be notes that sound happier or sadder, and this is what movie music kind of does. If they play like a note here, this note that is 1, 2, 3, 4 notes away from that root, in movie music is usually used to be happy times, good character, sun comes out from the clouds. If it's only 3 notes away, then it's kind of poignant plot turn, clouds in front of the sun, and sometimes evil character. And that's always the distance from the root. So if I'm playing in C and I go 1, 2, 3, 4 notes up, it's that movie happy tone. 1, 2, 3 notes up, it's our kind of sad tone. The blues third would be in there if we're talking about just intonation. Arabic music has other notes and they have a particular quality to them. And so if you're playing in a different system, I'd really recommend trying to play with the drone and try playing one note, feel into that, really build your own personal relationship so you know how to use it as a tool. And for now, I'm going to just play a different tone and I want you to listen to this one versus so listen, does it create tension? Does it make you want to move somewhere? Does it make you want to move up? Does it make you want to move down? Is it a particular feeling, or is it and if you're going to build your own scale in this workshop, I would say either pick one of these or this one. This would be one note up from the root, this is two notes up from the root, so it's a minor second or a major second. Going up to this third. Or going to this minor third. Feel into how they feel to you, what can be seen, how you might use them in music, and choose one of these thirds, the major third or a minor third. 5 notes away, it's called our perfect fourth. And what does this do to you? Is it neutral? Is it tense? Does it like to stay there? Does it want to move? Six notes away. Does this one feel tense? Does it feel relaxed? Is it something that you like to hear? Is it something that's uncomfortable to hear? Are there ways of using it either way? So, again, if we're building up your own scale and you're choosing one of these and one of these ones, choose either this one or choose this one. We come up to 7 notes above our perfect fifth. Does this one feel stable? Does it feel like it needs to move somewhere? Does it feel relaxed? Does it feel exciting? Coming up, actually, 8 notes away. Is this one relaxed, or is it needing to move? Does it need to move down or up? Same thing. 9 notes up. Is it happier or is it sadder? Is it neutral? And choose either this major 6 or this minor 6. Going up 10 notes away. Or 11 notes away. And do you like this minor 7, 10 notes away, or do you like this major 7 that's 11 notes away? And then if we go up one more, we're back to what's called the root again, or the octave. And this should once again feel like our home place. So each one of these intervals has a particular tension to it. It has a particular emotional quality often. Sometimes there's a note that builds tension that wants to go up. Sometimes there's notes that build tension and want to go down. Sometimes there's notes that have tension in it, but it's a little bit more comfortable and we could just hang out on it. And then there's sometimes notes that are really stable, that the note below it wants to pull in, the note above it wants to pull in. So these intervals are essentially the building blocks of all of our music. It's the language of music itself. It's in some ways the only syllables we have, or it's the only letters. Different tuning systems sometimes have more of them or different ones. But even if you have a found instrument that the notes are coming from just whatever material you grabbed and played, there's still whatever note you play the most often or first becomes that root note. And when you play notes that are above it or below it, there's a particular amount of tension or color in that. So whatever instrument you're playing on, the more that you can start to connect with the effect of those, the more that you can know how to use them to like kind of affect the sound of the music, the feel of the music for yourself and for others. If you're on and you listen to what notes you really liked, and if you wrote them down, if you wanted to share them on the chat, I can share what scales you chose. I can also pull up a list or diagram of some of these. So I'm going to hit share screen. And so within the screen, I end up having, here's the piano intervals. I started on the C. I use a minus for the minor 2. That's 1 note up. 2 notes up was this major 2. 3 notes up was this minor 3. 4 notes up was this major 3. 5 notes up was what we call the 4 or the perfect 4. 6 notes up was what we call the flat 5 or the tritone. Perfect 5th, 7 notes up. 8 notes, minor 6. 9 notes up, major 6. Minor 7 at 10, 11 notes is 7, and then we're back to that root. We could also do this on another instrument like a guitar, and in this case I wrote it out in the key of E, which means that you can use your low E string or the one that's closest to you, and the high E string is 2 roots, and by playing that lower root, it creates that same drone that I was doing. So you play this low note, and then you play the high note, and those are those same roots, and then you can just be 1 fret up, 2 frets up, 3, 4, so on and so forth, and pick out your intervals. Instead of writing an uppercase Roman numeral for the 3, I just made the default a major interval, and then I put a minus sign in front of the minor intervals. And really quickly, I'll demonstrate on the guitar how to play a drone and how to play intervals on the top of it. I'm going to stop that screen share. Sherry, if you'd be able to pen my face. So, if we're on a guitar, and this applies to any other string instrument, the easiest way would just be using this low E string as my drone. And I could end up doing a root, a fifth, and a root, and that can also include it, but just the root itself works. And that allows this note to be the octave above. And then if I go 2 frets up, I have that major 2. Or if I go 1 fret up, I have that minor 2. And so this drone I'm often playing kind of alternating, or you could pinch it at the same time. But you really want to hear this interval in relationship to that drone or that root, because it just creates a stronger dynamic and helps you feel what it's doing. Later on, when we play the drone, just kind of reinforces the musical character. If you're doing this on a banjo, you could do it with the low D string and the high D string. Any other string instrument also works, of course. If your own personal note was something other than an E, let's say you went and you found an A, you could find that, you can use that low A as your drone. You'd have to find an octave here, and then you're still going 1 note up for that minor 2 flamenco tone, or 2 notes up for that major. 3 notes up is that like movie sad tone minor 3rd, or 4 notes up So whatever note you start at, find that octave, and then these intervals stay exactly the same in 12-tone equal temperament tuning. So that's a little bit how to find it on the guitar. I'm going to show a chart of these different scales. Workshop attendees, are there, if you've heard particular notes that you like you like that minor 2 or that major 2, that minor 3, that major 3, feel free to write them in the chat and I can discuss those actual scales, or we can look at these particular scales here. I'm going to do a screen share to pull up these different notes. So on a guitar, these are where the intervals would be. And you could typically, you'd end up choosing either of the 2s. You choose either of the 3s. You choose this 4 or sometimes a sharp 4, which is also the flat 5. You choose a 5. You could be a flat 5. You could be a sharp 5. It's almost always the perfect 5th. You choose one of the 6s, you choose one of those 7s, and those intervals gives you kind of your palette, and your colors that you're playing with, the colors that you're creating, you start to create an aural story with. And so those are really your building blocks. And if I wanted to, let's say I picked out and I really like that root 2, I didn't like any of the minor intervals, it just chose all major and perfect. That builds our major scale. And so if I'm playing that there, I'm going to play this major scale, I'm going to skip a note in between, skip a note, play the note right next to it, skip a note in between, skip a note in between, skip a note in between, the note right next to it. And what that looks like would be and that's the classic Western solfeggio, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And a lot of music education used to stress these intervals as the building blocks and where everything came from. Classical Indian still does that, where you're really learning the intervals before anything else, and these become the building blocks for the compositions and ragas. And so the more that you get into these sounds, the more that you can use them. And this one here, that major 3 usually makes it pretty happy. The 4 and the 5 are really stable. This 2 builds tension, but a more comfortable way. Major 6, another kind of like happier tone often. This major 7 is the most dissonant or the most uncomfortable note, or the one that has the most dynamic movement, and it wants you to often play it up. If I go, so that's our major scale. But if we wanted to just drop a single note, let's say we didn't like this note that's really ascending, it's too much for us, we could just change it to this minor 7. And now it's less uncomfortable, it's less ascending, it can just hang out there, but there is a lot of tension to it. And this gets used a lot in blues music, a lot of folk music. And so I can keep having that major scale, and I've only changed one note, but it changes the sound of that aural landscape quite a bit, as opposed to really, major 7 has that really light, airy. And so that is the difference between like our major scale and our mixolydian. we've only dropped a single note, that major 7 down to a minor 7. And another way I can show this. So here is kind of how we classically call those intervals and how many notes up you go from that root. You can also look at, here's a different way of looking at the scales. This is that major scale where it's all major intervals and perfect intervals. The Mixolydian, we made that 7 a minor, so that one note drops down. And this is a list of other scales that we can play with. Each one has a particular sound. It gets used different ways in music and in movie music. So if I go back, so if we want to, I'll play through these a little bit so you can kind of get a feel for those changes. And each little change can kind of make a big difference, whether the note's ascending, whether it's descending, whether all of the intervals have a happy sound or a sad sound, whether they feel really stable. So I'm going to go from that major, went to this Mixolydian. I'm going to then go down into the Dorian and talk through each of these, or let you hopefully kind of build a relationship with them. So we have that major scale was that beginning, and then added the minor 7. All right, so Barb Noren, thank you for sending a scale. I see you have a root, a major 2, a minor 3, a 4, a flat 5. Nice. 5 and a minor 7. Cool. So this is really similar to your blues scale. I'll play that right now. So we have... It's a really neat scale. I like it too. It is similar to a major or a blues scale, which is similar to the minor pentatonic, where we have a root, minor 3, 4, 5, minor 7 back to the root, and then we add a flat 5 in between. And that flat 5, we end up using this in a lot of situations in the West as like our car horn or our sirens. It's called the tritone. It apparently was banned from the Catholic Church for centuries for bringing the devil into the room, called the tone of the devil. It's a really interesting sound. Woot band music, yeah, totally. Yeah. Too much. Apparently they said that this particular note, this interval, made people want to lust, made people passionate, brought the devil actually into the room. So they banned it from all of music, and now we use it all the time in pretty much every single blues chord that we play between the major 3rd and the minor 7. So it's a really fun sound, and this scale that you chose has that in it, but you also add in this 2. So it comes back to a 7-note scale, but you're skipping that 6, which gives us a step of 3 notes, which is often a really interesting sound in the West because we're most often used to only being 2 notes or 1 note. And this also has 3 chromatic notes right together. And with adding this 2 in there, yeah, Barb, thank you for sharing that scale. I actually don't know the name of it right now. Yeah, the 2 is mostly for something else to play with, yes. But this feels similar to a lot of bebop scales where they took a normal scale like the major scale or Mixolydian and they added 1 extra note, and adding 1 extra note sometimes creates different patterns. One example of the bebop scale, like if I'm going from that major scale, they just added like one more, adding in that minor third, which makes it so you actually have patterns of 8, which can sometimes play out differently. So that's a great example of what Barb did, of just finding some tones that she liked and then playing with them. And especially when you have your own instrument that you've created, or you're playing somebody else's and you might not know where the tones are, where those intervals are, you might not know how it breaks down or how it relates to any instruments that you know, really kind of like feeling into it and grasping the sound and the effect, and then choosing what stuff you like and what you play with. So thanks again, Barb, for sharing that. If anybody else has ones, please go ahead and share in the chat, but I'm going to go back to playing through those different modes. And I think I'm back to share it, yeah. So in this right now, we played that major scale, made it mixolydian. If I'm going to change to one more, I've already dropped the 7, and now I'm going to try dropping the 3. So right here. So if you're playing this on your own, try to play in and get a feel for how you might use it, feel for like what scene it would be in a book or a movie. This Dorian, having that minor 7 and that minor 3, to me this ends up feeling the most neutral. We don't have any of these super dissonant notes that are like pushing the note up. We don't have any notes right next to the 5th that are pulling into it. We don't have this descending tone. And we don't have this major 3 that kind of pulls into that 4. Essentially, any notes that are really stable, like the root, the perfect 5th, and even the 4th, when we have a note 1 away from it, it often wants to pull to where it sounds the most relaxed or calm. And if we got into just intonation, that's because these are simpler patterns. The root and to the octave is like 2 times as many sound waves. The 5th is 3 times as many sound waves. The 4th is an inversion of that. And so there's very stable tones that sound more relaxed. And if we're one note away, I think our brains kind of hear that it's really close to what would be very harmonious. But this Dorian ends up having no notes that are right next to those stable tones. It's always 2 notes away. So you can kind of actually hang out on any single one of these notes. And so for me, this is the most neutral, or the most like centered, balanced. Apparently, a lot of cultures used to use this scale as music before war, to kind of bring people into their bodies, bring people into their experience, try to give them kind of grounding, as opposed to raising them up or whatever. If you're using it for yourself, it might just be a great one to be within your own experience. This minor 3 does make it a little bit more sad, but there's no notes that are pushing us down. If I go to one more scale, then I'm going to grab from this Dorian, I'm also going to flat this 6. So we have a minor 3, minor 6, minor 7. And that minor 6 has does have a little bit of a descending quality. The scale's not super dark. And a lot of this scale gets used for contemplative music, thinking about stuff, feeling into them, kind of floating. It's a really beautiful scale to me. If we went one further and lower the 2, now we get into like a pretty dark scale or descending scale. And this note gets used a lot in flamenco music, talking about cante fondo or deep song, and kind of finding beauty and strength within situations that are really rough and not easy. So anytime we play that, there's this like descending quality. The woman that I mentioned, Harps of Lorien, she teaches people to use this for helping people with constipation. All of these notes are really descending. It can also help people kind of go into their depths a little bit more, which can be a really beautiful thing, can also be uncomfortable, and if so, you can just move one of these notes up. But from that Phrygian, which we went here with that minor 2, the next one in the modal series would be this flat 5, and this scale ends up feeling very different. If we have this flat 5, we end up having, there's no second anchor point. That perfect 5th really kind of reinforces where we're at and reinforces that root. If we have this flat 5 and no perfect 5th, it kind of creates... Can we see your screen again? I see a question from Barb. Can we see your screen again if you're referring to that? Are you asking on the guitar or asking in this? This Phrygian that we were talking about with that minor 2, that's at that 1st fret. I'm now talking about this Locrian, so I have a minor 2, minor 3, 4, this flat 5, this minor 6, minor 7, back to that root. And this flat 5 is where we're no longer having that perfect 5th that reinforces it. Great. It'd be nice to see the chart on your computer with the various modes. We're seeing... Oh! Sherry, can... I'm trying to share... Oh, shoot. Thank you, Barb. Okay. Thank you, Barb, for pointing that out. Oh, I can't see the chat anymore. Nope. Okay. So Barb asked to share the screen again. I didn't realize I wasn't sharing it. All right. Closing the chat. All right, so here's the screen with the diagrams. So flip through them. We had that major scale. We dropped a note to make it a minor 7. We dropped the minor 3rd to make it Dorian, that really grounded neutral scale. This Aeolian is where we had that minor 6, minor 3, minor 7. That minor 6 kind of pulls in to this 5. So that's where we started to get that descending motion. This is called the natural scale, or natural minor scale. If we go to here, the Phrygian, gets used in flamenco music a lot. It has that minor 7, minor 6 that was descending minor 3rd, but this minor 2 was new, and it really pushes into that root, and that's that descending note that I was talking about. And then we got into Locrian, where it's all those same intervals, minor 2, 3, 6, 7, but now this flat 5 no longer has this like second anchor point that reinforces the root. It kind of unanchors it. So coming back to that Dorian. Oh yeah, that's not going back to my... So the piano is what's being heard when... Yeah. So when I'm not sharing, if it's showing... Oh yeah. Sherry, can you pin my face screen instead of the piano screen? Or maybe not. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. If I was going into other scales, well, there's stuff called pentatonic scales, which are 5-note scales. Typically, most scales are 7 notes, and we'd end up taking 2 out to make it a little bit easier. This major pentatonic, we take out the 4, so it stops that chromatic note, which can be really uncomfortable or harder to play, and we take out that 7. This gets used a lot in flamenco music, folk music, Americana. Minor pentatonic, we kind of based it off of like Dorian or Aeolian. We took out that 2, which removes that chromatic movement. We take out the 6, removing that chromatic movement. This one gets used a ton in folk music, a lot of classic rock melodies, stuff like that. If we add the flat 5 in there, it ends up making it the blues scale, and we have that chromatic movement. Yeah, there's banjo intervals. So Sherry's back. I'm gonna stop the screen share. And Sherry, is the piano being seen, or is it my face? If we go back to the piano screen, I can talk a little bit of what to do with these different intervals.
It's your face. It's your face. And
Barb says,
what
"This is
would
the
you
world
like?
now.
What would
All
you like
technical
being-
difficulties
piano
all
is
the
being
time."
shown now.
Okay. So I'm going to show a little bit of what we'd actually do with these intervals. So let's say you found your note. Let's say you found a particular scale that you liked. So you had that root, minor 7, 5, flat 5, 4, minor 3, 2, 1. That gives us a really interesting scale to play with. Oh, whoops. And how do we tell a story with that? How do we build a soundtrack? We have those intervals and those building blocks. We have our scale from that. But if we think about it, kind of all storytelling is typically hooking an audience in, building up excitement, and then bringing it back, building up more excitement, bringing it back, and bringing it to a climax, and then bringing it back home. And musically, how do we do that? It's not, in some ways, it's not as literal. or at least verbal. But there's ways of setting a tone and building up tension and building or excitement and release. And typically, anytime we play a pattern in sounds, I believe it hooks our brain in. It kind of makes it. I think our brain's constantly scanning all of the sounds around us and all of the noise and looking for patterns in a way that means something, that feels connected. If you're in a city on the city streets and you're hearing the sound of cars whizzing by on the street, you don't have to pay attention. You know that it's just passing. But if the sounds change and it sounds like a car is about to jump up on the sidewalk, all of a sudden your brain grasps that information, finds that pattern, and like brings it into our conscious mind. So the way of hacking the brain, to me, as a music composer, songwriter, performer, anytime you play a pattern, it kind of hooks that brain into like, oh, there's something connected. That pattern could be the same note twice or 3 times. It could be one note, another note, and back. All sorts of like basic patterns or motifs. And sometimes ones that are really simple are going to be better than ones that are like that might be too far out in a way on the first time that we hear it to really recognize it as a pattern. So it might not hook a lot of people's brains. For some, it might be like, wow, that was really fascinating. Or if we repeat it, then it starts to go lock into that point of paying attention. But if you have one part, and we call that a motif, and that's kind of our home zone, that's that pattern. And if we repeat that pattern, it re-engages that brain. It's like, brain's like, yes, I was totally correct. That was a pattern. I'm listening to that pattern. If we keep repeating that same pattern over and over, for some people's brains, it's going to be really appealing and it can kind of move towards pop music. For some people's brains, it's like, I hear a pattern, it's the same pattern. I don't think that pattern's changing anymore. Let me like stop paying attention. So oftentimes we play a pattern, we repeat it, and then we start repeating it. But if we change it to 1 degree, that builds up kind of tension, builds up excitement, takes it a little bit further away from home. And then if we come back to that normal first pattern, it brings us back to the home place. And then we might repeat that same thing. And that gives us like a pattern. We've repeated that second pattern. Maybe then we go to a completely different pattern, maybe with some stillborn. So maybe that. And so we did a different pattern, and then we could come back to the first. And come back. Anytime we're building excitement, building tension, it definitely happens from changing those patterns, but particular intervals will have more tension. And so sometimes that tension or excitement's too much for what we want at the moment. Sometimes it's perfect, but it's all a choice that we have. And you can be writing music for everybody. You could be writing music for yourself or a smaller subset. And so if you're writing music for yourself, you might love things that are really kind of melodic and consistent and easy to take in. You might love stuff that's really kind of out there and more like 12-tone serialism. But it's all choices that you're kind of building together using these intervals. The distance between the intervals can be a really big thing. That major 3 is really usually happy. That minor 2 is usually kind of darker. If we combine the 2 and have 3 notes in between them, it's it's really dynamic. It's not similar to a lot of Western music. It's up sounding more like Eastern European music or Middle Eastern. So if you want to push your music, your own soundtracks, your own sounds into a little bit more exotic places, you can look for a way of offsetting a note so you have 3 notes in between. Say I'm going with this Dorian, but I want it to be more dynamic. If I move this 4 to that sharp 4, so it's all different things to play with, and the more that you learn your particular instrument, and even before that, the more that you really build a relationship with these intervals, with these different scales, you'll have these different sounds or these different tool sets that you can use at will. And even if you're playing on a new instrument, you'll at least have this kind of background to find things that you like, and to be able to shift things in a different direction or a particular direction if you want. And the more that you build up that oral storytelling of playing a pattern, changing the pattern, coming back, building excitement by increasing the range or the distance from one note to the next, offsetting rhythms instead of it just being on the beat. You can syncopate it, you can offset stuff, you can increase the rhythms, you can slow them down. There's all of these little things that you can use for really changing the sound, and oftentimes it's pretty... Do you ever try to subtly try to speak in your scales? Oh! Huh. I have not. It's an interesting thing. When I've done this, so some of this work I've done in sound healing sessions or complementary massage therapy, and like I often use it when people are having trouble accessing particular emotions, but it's work that they want to do. I'll basically connect with where they're at. Playing a scale, like if they're really grounded and balanced, I might use that Dorian scale. If they're really kind of like up, floating above everything and not connecting with things, I might use that major scale, and then I'll just like kind of stair step down into a different mood. Or if somebody's in a lot of trauma, I might start by connecting with that Phrygian scale, that flamenco scale, and then after connecting with them, I'll raise it up to that Aeolian so they can kind of float around and feel into what was going on, or I can bring it into that Dorian to be more grounded, or I can bring it up into that major scale to be more uplifting. And this is a really powerful thing that you can do for yourself. If you find your own note, you play that drone, and then you kind of connect whatever scale matches most with the feeling that you're at, and then you can kind of bring yourself up or down or make it more dynamic or more balanced. I haven't tried speaking the parts. That would be pretty... Yeah, I bet there's people that could do it really well. And it might be able to affect things. I have noticed, like, particular people when they have a particular note that's next to a particular noises note. For instance, I used to hate the sound of lights buzzing and electrical buzz, and realized that they were about a sixth of a note off from the note that I was speaking at. Had another friend that really hated the sound of computer fans. Who doesn't? But his note was really close to the fan whirling back and forth. Yeah, there's a lot of these really interesting connections with these notes, and they can be really powerful to play with, and the more that you connect with them, the more that you can use them for yourself and for others. I want to say thanks again to Sherry and to Joe and to the Maker Faire for inviting me to do a workshop. Thank you all for taking part and yeah, coming
Well,
in and like adding